The Industrial Revolution was one of the most important turning points in human history. Spanning from the mid-18th to the 19th century, societies that had relied for centuries on manual labor, simple tools, and agricultural production underwent a massive transformation. New machines, new energy sources, and new methods of production changed the way people worked, lived, traveled, and communicated. The world that emerged at the end of this period laid the foundations for modern industrial society. Before the Industrial Revolution, the vast majority of people lived in rural areas and engaged in agriculture. Products were generally manufactured by hand in small workshops or homes. Producing clothing, tools, and everyday items took long hours and required labor. Transportation was slow, and communication over long distances could take days or even weeks. Economic growth existed, but it was quite limited due to the constraints of human and animal power. The Industrial Revolution began in Great Britain in the second half of the 18th century. There were many reasons that enabled this transformation to occur. Britain possessed rich coal reserves, providing a powerful energy source. It also had iron ore resources, expanding global trade networks, a growing population, and a relatively stable political environment. Capital generated from trade and colonial activities enabled investment in new technologies and industries. All these conditions combined created a favorable environment for innovation to flourish. One of the earliest and most significant changes occurred in the textile sector. For centuries, spinning yarn and weaving fabrics were largely done by hand. Inventors began developing machines that could perform these tasks much faster than traditional methods. The spinning jenny, developed by James Hargreaves in the 1760s, allowed for the simultaneous spinning of multiple yarns. Richard Arkwright's water-powered spinning machine further increased production. Soon, textile production moved from homes and small workshops to large factories where machines could operate continuously. As production increased, so did the need for energy. Water wheels had certain limitations because they required factories to be built along riverbanks. A simpler solution emerged with the development of the steam engine. Although some earlier examples existed, Scottish engineer James Watt made improvements to the steam engine in the late 18th century, making it much more practical. Thanks to these innovations, steam power became a practical energy source for industrial use. Steam engines could power machinery, draw water from mines, and eventually power transportation. For the first time in history, large-scale production was no longer dependent on human labor, animal power, or rivers. Coal became the primary fuel that fueled this new industrial age. Mines expanded rapidly to meet the growing demand. Simultaneously, advances in iron production made it possible to build more powerful machines, larger factories, and more advanced infrastructure. Iron bridges, railways, and industrial machinery became symbols of the changing world. Later, innovations in steel production further accelerated this growth, enabling the use of more durable and stronger materials. The factory system completely transformed working life. Instead of producing goods at home, people began working in large industrial facilities. Factories brought together workers, machinery, and raw materials in one place, allowing production to reach unprecedented levels. Produced goods became cheaper and more accessible to a wider audience. However, factory life was often harsh. Workers toiled long hours under strict supervision. Safety measures were limited, and working conditions could be dangerous. Men, women, and children worked in the same challenging environments. Industrialization also improved cities. As factories grew, millions migrated from rural areas to cities in the hope of finding work. Cities like Manchester, Birmingham, and Liverpool grew rapidly. Population growth outpaced the pace of infrastructure development. Overcrowding, inadequate sewage systems, and environmental pollution became widespread problems. Smoke from factories darkened the city skies, while waste polluted rivers and water sources. Despite all these problems, cities became centers of economic opportunity, innovation, and social change. Transportation also underwent its own transformation. Improved roads and canals enabled more efficient transport of goods, but the greatest breakthrough came with the development of steam locomotives. In the early 19th century, engineers like George Stephenson revealed the potential of rail transport. Railroads drastically reduced travel times and connected regions in ways previously impossible. Raw materials were transported faster to factories, and manufactured goods were more easily shipped to distant markets. Railroad networks quickly spread across Europe, North America, and other parts of the world. Steam power also transformed maritime transport. Steamships reduced reliance on wind and weather conditions, making travel and trade more reliable. Oceans, once considered extremely difficult to traverse, were connected by regular sea routes. Global trade expanded, and economic ties between continents strengthened. The movement of goods, people, and ideas accelerated, resulting in a more interconnected global economy. The Industrial Revolution was not solely about machines and factories. It also fostered scientific research and technological innovation. Inventors, engineers, and entrepreneurs sought new solutions to practical problems. This culture of experimentation and discovery created a continuous cycle of development. Advances in chemistry, metallurgy, and engineering gave rise to new industries and new opportunities. Technological progress became one of the main engines of economic growth. Industrialization gradually expanded beyond Britain. Belgium became one of the first countries in continental Europe to industrialize, followed by France, Germany, and other European countries. In the United States, abundant natural resources, a growing population, and developing transportation networks supported rapid industrial development. By the end of the 19th century, industrial economies had emerged in much of the Western world and parts of Asia. The social consequences of industrialization were profound. Factory owners, industrial entrepreneurs, and urban workers became significant forces in society. While the wealth created by industry offered great opportunities to some, others faced poverty and harsh living conditions. These inequalities gave rise to political debates and social reform movements. Labor organizations demanded higher wages, shorter working hours, and safer working conditions. Over time, governments began to implement regulations to protect workers. Education also became more important in the industrial age. Developing industries needed a workforce with new skills. Literacy rates rose and access to education increased in many regions. Scientific and technical education became increasingly valuable as economies became more dependent on innovation. The Industrial Revolution also had environmental consequences. Large-scale coal use led to the release of large amounts of smoke and pollutants into the atmosphere. Forests, rivers, and natural landscapes were affected by industrial activities. While industrialization increased productivity and living standards over time, it also brought with it environmental problems whose effects are still felt today. Towards the end of the 19th century, industrial technologies continued to develop. Advances in electricity, new communication systems, and production techniques marked the beginning of what historians call the Second Industrial Revolution. Innovations such as the telephone, electric lighting, and improved steel production reshaped economies and societies. Industrialization began to become a global force influencing the development of nations and international relations. The legacy of the Industrial Revolution can be seen all over the world today. Modern factories, global supply chains, railway networks, and mass production systems owe their origins to this period of transformation. The technologies and economic structures that emerged in the 18th and 19th centuries laid the foundations of the modern world. Many of today's debates, such as those concerning labor, technology, inequality, urbanization, and environmental sustainability, are rooted in the changes that began during this period. The Industrial Revolution was more than just the result of machines and factories. It was the product of human creativity and adaptability. It represents the era when technological innovations began transforming society on an unprecedented scale. Developments that began in the workshops, mines, and factories of 18th century Britain ultimately impacted the lives of billions of people. From the steam engine to railways, from industrial cities to global trade networks, the Industrial Revolution fundamentally changed the course of history. It redefined how people worked, how economies functioned, and how societies developed, laying the foundation for the interconnected world we live in today.